the best way to follow up one marathon video is with another. That's right. Staying in the history vein, because again, as it stands, I don't have enough material from anything happening in hockey yesterday and today to make a current video on that. So after this, we'll find something else to look at, hockey related, and so we'll come to that. Chicago. So you can see, we've got the classic Hawks gear on, not their current logo. The difference between the current logo and the classic one, you really don't notice it unless somebody points it out. Most people wouldn't even know they really changed the logo. Not a big difference, but it is chain stitched onto the jersey. I will say that Chicago jerseys are made very well. This is not chain stitched. This is obviously a replica, but if you buy an authentic, you're getting a chain stitched logo, which is really, really nice. I just figured I'd throw that in. Long storied history for the Chicago Blackhawks, where they had some success. They got very frustrated during the 60s because they had the right players. They just couldn't get the right results in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And then it got frustrating from then until the 2010s, where things start looking pretty darn dynasty-like. Their top all-time scorers, Stan Mikita is their all-time leading scorer. 541 goals, 926 assists, 1,467 points. Going to go out on a limb and say it's highly unlikely anybody ever reaches that. Bobby Hull, 604 goals, 549 assists, 1,153 points. Denny Savard, 377 goals, 719 assists, 1,096 points. So they got 3 guys at 1,000, and soon it's going to be 4, because Patrick Kane, 356 goals, 582 assists, 938 points with the Chicago Blackhawks. Steve Larmer, I've mentioned him being underrated before, right? I'm mentioning it again. 406 goals, 517 assists, 923 points. Doug Wilson, 225 goals, 554 assists, 779 points. Jonathan Toews, 327 goals, 428 assists for 755 points. Dennis Hull, 298 goals, 342 assists for 640 points. Pitt Martin, 243 goals, 384 assists for 627 points. And Jeremy Roenick comes in at 10th, 267 goals, 329 assists, 596 points. And in all likelihood, Duncan Keith is going to pass him and knock him out of the top 10 this coming season. Your wins leaders, Tony Esposito with 418. I don't know that ever gets equaled either, to be honest. Glenn Hall, 276. Corey Crawford, 244. Ed Belfour, 201. And Jocelyn Thibault, 137. Yeah, Jocelyn Thibault. That's right. Chicago's gone through its share of goaltenders. Tony Esposito held down the fort for a long time in between. And so Jocelyn Thibault is in the top 5 all-time among their goaltenders. Top 5 coaches for wins. Billy Ray, 516. Far and away the leader. He might have been threatened by Joel Quenneville, but they got rid of him last season. 452 wins for Quenneville. Bob Pulford, 185. Randy Pilas, 162. And Mike Keenan is in 5th with 153. I have a feeling Mike Keenan's going to be in the top 5 for a few teams. Not Vancouver, though. So, overall, again, it's been a middling experience. And when we look at their top 10 draft picks in team history, you get a feeling for just how long and just how often in recent decades they were down at or near the bottom. 1963 we'll start with, because that's the first year we had the draft. They had the number 5 pick. Art Hampson is picked. 1964, drafting 4th, they draft Richie Bays. This is when I mentioned the draft didn't get taken seriously until the 70s. I think Guy Lafleur opened a lot of eyes. 1965, drafting 2nd, Art Culligan. Drafting 7th, Brian McKenny. 1966, drafting 3rd, Terry Caffrey. Drafting 9th, Ron Duciemi. Or Duciemi. I don't think he played, so it's okay. 1967, Bob Tambari is drafted in the first round, number 7th overall. 1968, drafting 9th, they draft John Marks. he would have an NHL career. 1975, so 7 years in between drafting in the top 10. Then Greg Vadic is drafted at 7th. 1976, drafting 9th, Real Cloutier, who would play, of course, for Quebec, and then crash and burn in Buffalo. 1977, drafting 6th, Doug Wilson is drafted in that spot. Pretty good pickup for them. 1978, drafting 10th, Tim Higgins. 1979, drafting 7th, Newfoundland's own Keith Brown. I remember these things. Because my dad being from Newfoundland, every time Keith Brown was, we'd hear about how Keith Brown was a Newfoundlander. 1980, Denny Savard is drafted 3rd overall. Falls into their laps miraculously, while Doug Wickenheiser goes 1st. 1982, drafting 7th, they get Ken Yaremchuk. 1984, drafting 3rd with a draft pick they got from the Kings. They get Eddie Olczyk at number 3. 1987, drafting 8th, Jimmy Waite. And Jimmy Waite, of course, at the NHL level, it just didn't work out for him. But he was the goalie in waiting, the goalie of the future for Chicago. And that's the kiss of death. 1988, drafting 8th overall again, Jeremy Roenick. So Roenick, who ends up 10th on the board. And Roenick, who was one of my favorite players when he started playing the game. And you hear him talk a bunch, and the more I heard him talk, the more he dropped down the list. 1989, drafting 6th, Adam Bennett. 1998, so a 9-year gap there, drafting 8th, Mark Bell. 2000, drafting 10th, Mikhail Yakubov. This was when they were drafting a bunch of Russian players with the idea of, I'm not sure what the plan was, but it didn't work. 2001, drafting 9th, Tuomo Ruutu, and drafting 3rd in 2004, Cam Barker. Drafting 7th in 2005, Jack Skilly. This was a poorly run team. Have I mentioned that? Because we get to 2006 and they draft Jonathan Toews at 3, and everybody goes, see, tanking works. Yeah, they were at or near the bottom for about a decade. And there were some draft picks that didn't pan out very well for them. 2007, of course, they draft number 1 overall. They get Patrick Kane, and the rest is history. They didn't draft in the top 10 again until last year, 2018, where they draft 8th and get Adam Boqvist. And this past draft, a month ago, they pick up Kirby Dach, at number 3. And, of course, we'll see whether or not he at number 3 becomes what Toews was to this team, what Eddie Olczyk was at one point to this team as well, or Terry Caffrey. I don't know. I would throw in Cam Barker, but Barker's a defenseman, so I have no idea. Caffrey could be a defenseman as well. I don't put the positions on the board because I already know it's going to be tough to get everything on the board as it is. So, there you go. Captains. Okay. I can do this. Captains for the Chicago Blackhawks. Dick Irvin was their captain from 1926 to 1929. That's a surprise to me because Dick Irvin, that name is synonymous with the Montreal Canadiens. Duke Dukowski from 1929 to 1930. Ty Arbor, 1930 to 31. Cy Wentworth, 1931 to 1932. And it makes you wonder, was Cy the one that they wanted for captain and Ty thought he heard his name and so they didn't want to hurt his feelings, so they're like, you know what, Cy, we're going to make you captain next year. Look how happy Ty is that he got the C. We'll just let him have it. Let's let him have it for this year. Helgi Bostrom then had it in 32-33. Charlie Gardner, 33-34. Johnny Gottslieg, 1935 through 1940. And then Earl Siebert, 1940 to 42. Doug Bentley, 1942 to 44. And 1949 to 1950. Clint Smith, 1944 to 45. John Mariucci, 1945-46, 47 to 48. Easy for me to say, right? Red Hamill, 1946 to 47. Gay Stewart, 1948 to 49. And then Jack Stewart from 1950 to 52. So again, this might be one of those times where they went, hey, Stewart. Oh, Gay's coming over. We really wanted to give it to Jack. Well, we'll give it to him next year. All right. Bill Gadsby, 1952 to 54. Gus Mortson, 54 to 57. Ed Linsenberger, 58 to 61. Pierre Pilote, 61 through 68. Camille Henry, 64-65, so he co-captained with Pilote in 64-65. Pat Stapleton, 1969 to 70. Stan Mikita from 75 to 77. A bit of a surprise that Mikita wasn't captain for longer. Pip Martin was also a captain, 75 through 77. Keith Magnussen, 76 through 80, and depending on who you ask from people who remember back then, Magnussen was one of the toughest SOBs to ever play the game. Tom Lysiak, 78-79. Terry Ruskowski, 79 to 82. Daryl Sutter from 82 through 87. Bob Murray, 85-86. Denny Savard, 88-89. So again, much like Stan Mikita, you would have thought Denny Savard was captain for longer. Dirk Graham, 88 through 95. Brent Sutter, 91-92. Troy Murray, 92-93. Chris Chelios, 95 through 99. Dougie Gilmore, 99 to 2000. Tony Amonte, 2000 through 2002. Tom Fitzgerald, 2001-2002. Lyle Odeline, also 2001-2002. That's that whole rotating captain thing that makes these boards a lot more busy than they should be. Alexei Zhamnov, 2002 to 2004. Martin Lapointe, 2005 to 2007. Adrian Aucoin, also 2005 through 2007. Jonathan Taves from 2008 through now. And Andrew Ladd was listed for 2015-2016 as well. So Taves has been captain for a long time, which saved me from running out of ink on that marker that quickly. But it is an interesting list. It is interesting that Bobby Hull's not on it. By today's standards, your best player is often your captain. Your big scorer is often your captain. And yet, when you look at Mikita, Hull, Savard, nope. Kane has not been captain, but Taves has. So Taves, one of the big scorers for this last 10 years. Although his scoring has fluctuated a little bit more over the last few. It is interesting that the biggest stars in Chicago history really haven't spent that much time as captain. Despite all of these captains on this board, the big names, for the most part, not captains. So, just an interesting thing I noticed. They've had 6 Stanley Cups in their history. They've been in the playoffs 62 out of 93 seasons. They moved to United Center in 1994. Chicago Stadium was considered the loudest building ever in NHL history. And they're named after the 333rd Machine Gun Battalion of the 86th Infantry Division during World War I. Their owner, that was where he served, so that's what he named the team after, was the Blackhawks. And it was 2 words until 1986-87. Yeah, became 1 word in 86-87. So it would have been 2 words, Black Hawks, and then I was slap it together. So they've had an interesting history. I know there's been some talk here and there about their logo being insensitive or whatever, compared to a lot of other sports insensitivity kind of ideas. I'm not really going to get into it because I don't think it's a big deal. Chicago really, I don't consider what they do to be offensive at all. And I say that, and then people always get upset. But that's just, you know, that's the thing. And the logo being as the logo is, I think it's a respectful, decent logo. But that's me. I'm going to jump right as far out of that conversation as I can, because again, this is just about Chicago's history. That is part of their history. Absolutely, 110%. The logo has changed a lot compared to other original 6 teams. The native head has been pretty close to the same, but it has changed over the years. But they used to have the circle around it with Chicago Blackhawks and all that other stuff. And the head itself has changed a few times. In 1938, they set a record that you don't want to set, kind of. They win the Stanley Cup, but they win the Stanley Cup with a regular season record of 14, 25, and 9. So they win 14 games during the regular season, and then they win the Stanley Cup. If that happened now, people would lose their minds. If a sub-500 team eked its way into the playoffs and then won the Stanley Cup, people would go crazy if that happened today. So that's a record that'll never get beaten, is that horrible regular season, and yet they still win the Stanley Cup. All right, trades. So again, I had to limit this. I had to limit it to from 1967 until now. I also had to limit it to trades that I thought made a big difference or trades that I thought were really interesting. So there's going to be trades that are not on the board that people are like, hey, why isn't this one on there? Because I was running out of room. And when I'm running out of room, I got to be really picky about which trades I put in there, and I go in chronological order. So I'm not going to hit the 2018 trade and then go, oh, I should go back and include. No, I'm not going to do that. May 15th, 1967, the Chicago Blackhawks added Jack Norris, Pitt Martin, and Gilles Marat. Going the other way to Boston, Ken Hodge, Phil Esposito, and Fred Stanfield. Ouch. That's just ouch all around for Chicago. May 14th, 1973, the Chicago Blackhawks added Dale Talon from the Canucks for Jerry Korab and Gary Smith. Gary Smith, of course, would have a good run with the Vancouver Canucks, but then he'd run out the door. It's a whole... There's actually, I talk about it in the history video from way back when. And the Canucks are trying to get rid of Talon, who has never become the guy they drafted after Gilbert Perreault. He's never really justified why he was drafted right after Perreault. So I feel bad for Talon, who had a half-decent career, but again, when you're being compared to Gilbert Perreault. On June 16th, 1978, the Chicago Blackhawks add the number 28 draft pick overall, which becomes Steve Ludzik in 1980. Vancouver gets Thomas Gradin. So this starts a tradition of Chicago kind of giving some pretty good players to Vancouver. June 9th, 1979, the Chicago Blackhawks get the number 3 overall draft pick, which becomes Denny Savard. Quebec trades that draft pick to them so they can keep the rights to Real Cloutier, who's been a scoring star in the WHA, and they don't want to lose him. So Chicago had the rights to take him. When the WHA teams came into the NHL teams could go, well, yeah, you have a nice roster there. Yeah, I own that guy, and I own that guy, and I own this. So Quebec doesn't want to lose Cloutier, and Chicago could have taken him. So they're like, here's a draft pick to leave us alone, and that draft pick becomes Denny Savard. Wow. January 6, 1983, Chicago adds Kurt Fraser, a good sandpaper forward who can score some goals. Vancouver adds Tony Tanti, who would become their first ever 40-goal scorer. September 3rd, 1987, Chicago adds Bob McGill, Steve Thomas, and Rick Vive. So, not long after complaining about Bob McGill and the Leafs and how he shut down Al Secord, now they're trading them for each other. Chicago sends Eddie Olczyk and Al Secord to Toronto in this trade. So, it's a bizarre trade when you look at, and I did a video today on the 85-86 season, and yeah, Bob McGill, who had shut down Al Secord in the playoffs in the 86 playoffs, and then in 87 they're being traded for each other. Bizarro world. Really, seriously, bizarro world. And the fact that Rick Vive goes to Chicago, it's kind of a huge deal. Even by today looking at it, you can still see there's a lot of big names in it. January 3rd, 1988, and what made it weirder is they were in the same division. January 3rd, 1988, the Chicago Blackhawks add Dirk Graham from a division rival in Minnesota, who pick up Kurt Fraser. This is not a good move for Minnesota. Dirk Graham goes on to be their captain, and really, he looks like a Blackhawk anyways. As soon as Dirk Graham throws on a Chicago jersey, it's like, yeah, that's kind of what he's supposed to be wearing. 1990, June 29th, Chris Chelios is added from the Chicago Blackhawks for Denny Savard. Montreal fans never quite forgive Montreal for passing on Denny Savard and picking up Doug Wickenheiser. So 10 years later, they decide to make good and pick up Savard, and they give up Chelios. Chelios goes on to be a huge pain in the you-know-what for the Chicago Blackhawks, and he is fantastic on their blue line, and Montreal made a mistake again. They make a mistake passing on Savard, and then they made a mistake picking up Savard, who never reaches those heights with Montreal that he did with Chicago. He does win a Stanley Cup. I would be remiss not to mention he wins the Stanley Cup in 93. But he's not the driving force behind that Stanley Cup. Now, August 7th, 1992, the worst mistake that Chicago's ever made. Stefan Beauregard in a 1993 fourth-round pick that becomes Eric Daze, acquired from Buffalo in exchange for Dominic Hasek. At the time, it makes sense. So we look back now and we say, what a horrible deal. At the time, it makes sense. They got Eddie the Eagle Belfour, who had won the Calder Trophy, the Vezina Trophy. He looks fantastic. 1992, they went to the Stanley Cup Final. They got destroyed by Pittsburgh, but they went to the Stanley Cup Final. There's a very real belief that the Chicago Blackhawks in the 90s are going to win a Stanley Cup. Dominic Hasek, veteran goaltender, not getting a shot in Chicago. He's not going to unseat Eddie the Eagle. So they move him. He's not going to have a high value because he's a backup goaltender. And again, he's older. When he came over to the NHL, he was older. And so, yeah, they just, all right, he's available. We're just going to get rid of him. The fact that Hasek becomes a world beater with Buffalo, should they have seen it coming? Maybe. Should they've got more back? Sure. But at the time, Eddie the Eagle is fantastic. And everybody in Chicago loved Belfour. August 21st, 1994, Chicago acquires Tony Amonte, Matt Oates. The Rangers acquire Stefan Matteau and Brian Noonan. So this is a Keenan trade. Keenan ends up going from Chicago to New York. He wants Noonan and Matteau. And when he came to Vancouver, Vancouver traded for Noonan. I think he had Noonan in St. Louis as well. It was weird. I was always surprised Stefan Matteau didn't come to Vancouver as well. Remember when Noonan came, like, all right, where's Matteau? Not coming? Oh, all right. So in this deal, Chicago gets the best player in Amonte. And I feel bad for Tony Amonte because that means he doesn't get to enjoy the Stanley Cup a few months after that the rest of his ex-teammates will. Probably still not a good thing for him. But Amonte goes on to have a very good career with the Chicago Blackhawks. August 16th, 1996, the Chicago Blackhawks acquire Craig Mills, Alexei Zhamnov, a 1997 first. Phoenix acquires Jeremy Roenick. So Roenick ends up being out of Chicago. Alexei Zhamnov had a pretty good run with Chicago. I'll qualify that trade as a saw-off. That 97 first doesn't become anybody of consequence. And Craig Mills, I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this going, who? Yeah. February 26, 2008. There were a lot of trades made during that 12 years in between. Nothing really of huge consequence, though. I was really surprised. Chicago acquires Andrew Ladd. Carolina acquires Tuomo Ruutu. Ruutu had a good run with Carolina, not going to lie. But Andrew Ladd is kind of a key guy for Chicago, that first Stanley Cup. February 12th, 2010, the Chicago Blackhawks acquire Kim Johnson and Nick Leddy. Minnesota gets Cam Barker. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Minnesota lost this trade. But I understood, Barker, who had been a number 3 draft pick in 2004, 6 years later, you're looking and going, this kid's still young. He can do it. And he looks pretty good at first in the Minnesota Wild jersey, and then it kind of falls apart after. June 23rd, 2010. So this is after the Stanley Cup. This is when the snafu with the contracts ends up happening. So you have a window in which you got to qualify guys. We came through free agency, and you got to qualify your restricted free agents. If you don't qualify them, they're unrestricted, and they can ask whatever they want. Paperwork's not filed at the right time, so the Chicago Blackhawks, who are already facing a salary cap crunch, now they can't sign everybody. They can't keep everybody. So they got to sign guys. They got to give them more money than they should have, because rumor has it may have been Stan Bowman that was the guy that made the mistake, but he doesn't take the fall for it. And so they have to trade guys off from that team that just won the Stanley Cup days earlier. Chicago gets Joey Crabb, Jeremy Morin. Jeremy Morin moved around more over the last decade and was always seen as this guy. He could break through. He just needs the right chance. Marty Reisner, a 2010 first, who's Kevin Hayes. Sorry, Blackhawk fans. 2010 second, which is Justin Hall, who's now, of course, in the Toronto organization. Atlanta picked up Dustin Byfuglien, Akeem Alou, Ben Eager, and Brent Sopel. And, of course, Dustin Byfuglien is the name there. Dustin Byfuglien, who had been an absolute beast for the Chicago Blackhawks in those playoffs. He had played forward, he had played defense, and now he's going to the Atlanta Thrashers because they need cap space due to the issue with the contracts. Did you sign it? Yeah. Did you send him in? Yeah. Crap. So they emerged from that relatively unscathed, but it takes them a little while to get back to where they need to be. They would win the Cup in 2013. They'd win it in 2015 as well. October 4th, 2014, so in between the 2013 and 2015 Cups. Chicago acquires Kent Simpson, TJ Brennan, Ville Polka, and Anders Nilsson. New York Islanders acquire Nick Leddy. Brilliant, brilliant trade by the Islanders. That's Garth Snow, boys and girls. Yep. So basically 4 players go to Chicago. Polka is seen as the one who could be the dark horse. He never makes the NHL. At this point, he's in Europe. I don't see him coming back. But he is seen as kind of the guy who may be the steal of the trade. And Anders Nilsson, who suffered from a numbers problem with the Islanders. They just had too many goalies. And so Chicago picks him up with the idea of, maybe he can be the backup. June 30th, 2015, Chicago acquires Marco Dano, Artem Anisimov, Corey Tripp, Jeremy Morin again, and a 2016 fourth. Columbus acquires Brandon Saad, Alex Broadhurst, and Michael Paliota. So this is the trade they make right after winning another Stanley Cup, their last Stanley Cup. Well, I'll say most recent. I'm not going to say last because it makes it sound very final. But it is their most recent Stanley Cup. And losing Saad hurts. 100% hurts them. Dano, of course, still struggling to make the NHL. Anisimov, who is rumored to be on the trade block seems like every few months with Chicago. Tripp never really was a regular in the NHL. And a 2016 fourth. So they didn't get enough back for Saad. They needed to move Saad's contract because they had to keep their team together. And this has been kind of an ongoing theme with Chicago. But they're not done. June 15th of 2016, again in a cap move, Chicago acquires 2016 second and a 2017 third. Carolina acquires Brian Bickle, so that's the contract they needed to get rid of. For Chicago to get rid of Bickle's contract, they also had to throw in Teuvo Teravainen. And Teravainen, of course, has become one of the better young forwards for the Carolina Hurricanes since that trade took place. Chicago knew what they were getting rid of. They knew what Teravainen was going to be, but they had to get rid of Bickle's contract. June 13th, 2017, Chicago acquires Brandon Saad. So unmaking the mistake they made of trading Saad, they also get back Anton Forsberg and a 5th-round pick in 2018. But Columbus exacts a pretty high price for this. Artemi Panarin, Tyler Mott, and a 2017 6th. Part of the reason Bowman trades Panarin is because he knows what Panarin's going to be like to deal with as an unrestricted free agent, and he doesn't want to deal with it. He knows that it's going to be tough to convince him to stay in Chicago. And when you look at what's just happened with Columbus, where Panarin's ended up going to the Rangers, on some level, this trade, which he was panned for a lot at the time, Chicago's come out ahead in this because they still have Saad, and Columbus didn't get anything for Panarin. So long term, looking at it in the long term, this trade works out as a win for Chicago. November 25th of 2018, Chicago acquires Dylan Strome and Brendan Perlini for Nick Schmaltz going to Arizona. Now, rumors right now are that maybe Brandon Perlini is on the trade market. Chicago might be looking to move him. He did have a really slow start as a Blackhawk. He had a pretty good run in the middle of his time and then kind of quieted down again. It would not surprise me to see Perlini end up on the move. But with Chicago, because they've had success, because Kane and Taves make a combined $21 million, there's always going to be that they need to save some money somewhere. I did not put up the most recent moves they made involving defensemen, but we all know those trades took place very, very recently. And I'm not sure how earth-shaking or how much of a shift in the standings those trades are going to cause. The big thing for Chicago right now, going into the 2019-2020 season, I think is going to be Robin Lehner. We saw Corey Crawford go through a lot of concussion issues over the last couple of years. He's not going to be a guy who's playing 55, 60 games in a season, so you're going to need to split starts. Lehner should be able to do that, and that should go a long way in deciding what kind of a team Chicago is going to have this coming season. There you go. Let me know your thoughts regarding the Chicago Blackhawks in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and thank you guys so much for all your support and for watching. I will talk to you again soon.